another dialogue options, a very special dialogue options. You'll notice Momo is here with me from the beginning here because he knows Rhianna is a cat person. I'm joined today by Rhianna Pratchett, very famous video game writer, best known as the writer of Tomb Raider, but also the writer on games like Bioshock Infinite, Mirror's Edge, and two of my favorite games, the Overlord and Heavenly Sword games. So Rhianna, thank you for joining us on Dialogue Options.
And I have my, as a Brit, I have my tea, and I also have my cat.
Yes.
Yeah, she's just in front of Toothy Shark there on my very messy sofa. So she wanted to meet Momo, so she has joined it, and I now have to reposition this.
We are finding some strange commonalities, Rhianna and I. We are both cat ladies who like tea and green walls and brown couches.
Yeah, we do have exactly the same coloured walls. But my cat is not as snuggly as yours, unfortunately. I'm hoping that you will take notes.
Yeah, Momo is the snuggly one. Delilah is not snuggly at all. So Delilah is the crabby tabby that we have.
Yeah.
So yeah. So other than cats, which are important, I want to talk to you about video game writing because I think a lot of people don't actually understand the process specific to video game writing. It's very different than even TV or film writing. So what does a game writer actually do? What part of the process do you come in?
It's difficult to describe because it varies from project to project and genre to genre. So it depends on when you're brought into the project, the project itself, what genre it is, the narrative sensibilities of the team, time and budget, and so that will dictate how your job will play out. And often with smaller teams, for example, you mentioned Overlord, so that they were probably about 30 or so, and that included external contractors as well, but a much smaller team, so I could kind of interact with the level designers directly on that. I was the only writer. They had a narrative designer on the second game and not on the first. So it was very sort of direct one-on-one with the developers. And I worked with the audio team, and I helped direct the voice acting in the first one, and directed and cast the second one. Something like Tomb Raider, for example, massive team. Mm-hmm. So they have narrative designers who are the conduit between myself and the rest of the team. So again, that like there's no, like with movies, there's no real plan, I guess, or exactly the way the things work. It always depend on those factors. So when I first started out in the industry, writers, if they were used, were often drafted in very late in the process, something I call being a narrative paramedic, which I think is genuinely a term I coined about a decade ago. And it is being sort of parachuted on at the end of the project when the story is bleeding profusely and you just have to save it. And it is usually because the story's not really been thought about that much, or no one was paying attention to the story with the rigors of development, and it's a mess, or it wasn't looked at by a professional writer, and it was just left to the sidelines, and someone's gone, hey, this doesn't really make sense, maybe it would be good if it made sense, let's get a writer in. And that used to be the way that things would work, largely outside of narrative heavy games like adventure games or RPGs, where often the writers would be the designers, so they would be in-house, but they weren't usually professional full-time writers, so they would usually be designers as well as writers. And that's still prevalent, and there's some great designer writer work out there. Bethesda their designers have always done the writing work as well, and sometimes that can work really well. But kind of outside of the narrative, those two narrative heavy genres, if they were used, were kind of sort of parachuted in. I used to take those kind of gigs. I don't anymore because they're soul destroying and frustrating, and you think, oh my god, I could have done all these things if only I'd been in early. But usually a writer, certainly on a big game, has to be part of the team. You're a cog in a machine. You're working with the rest of your narrative team. That could involve other writers, that could involve narrative designers, narrative directors, creative directors. So with something like Tomb Raider, the first game, I mainly work with Noah Hughes, who's the creative director, and John Stafford, who came on later, who's our senior narrative designer. and then my work with them carried over to Rise, and we were joined by Karen Suey, who was a narrative designer. So yeah, it really depends. Nowadays, developers are becoming much more, used to the idea of using writers and thinking about them early in the development process and getting them in, like even if it's for only a little bit in the concepting phase, just to get some professional narrative eyes on it. So yeah, that it has become a lot better. People are thinking about writers more. When I started out as a games journalist, that one of the questions that was bouncing around the industry was, do we need professional writers? There are articles, coming out saying, do we really need professional writers? And I thought, well, you have professional everything else. You have professional artists and programmers. Why the hell would you put something in a game that's not done by a professional in that field? And so, over that time, the industry's gone, well, okay, we'll use professional writers. But then they're still getting used to how to use professional writers, how you integrate them into a team, who they have to have communication with, what they need to know, and writers themselves are still getting used to that as well.
Mm-hmm.
They're still sort of kind of working out how they fit in. So there's still a lot of teething troubles, but we are in a much better place than we used to be.
It's always so funny to me that they're like, do we need professional writers? Because going back to those, 80s adventure games, it was all writing. And I mean,
Yeah.
people like Jane Jensen have gone on to have very successful careers as novelists.
Mm-hmm.
And why do you think the story, because when a layman talks about a game, the first thing they talk about is the story. So why do you think there's that sort of disconnect in the ideas, the minds of the industry about what a game needs?
I think, yeah, we used to, as entertainment consumers, having stories told to us. I mean, from the dawn of time, we want to have stories told to us. And we're storytelling creatures, and we look for the narrative in everything. We look for the story, and we will piece it together, even if it's kind of very minimal. We want to kind of understand. And so I think it's very common to talk about games in terms of the story, but also in the kind of the gameplay moments you kind of may get out of it. So something like Left 4 Dead, which I play with my partner and his brothers. Like we I don't know if there's much a story apart from zombie apocalypse, but we think about it in moments, in funny things that happened in the level. So I think gamers kind of think about it in those terms. They also think about it in the story, because it's a good way of summing stuff up.
Mm-hmm.
And I genuinely think that for a while, maybe publishers and developers didn't think that story was that important, that it wasn't very important to players. And there's certainly players that don't really care. They'd like something to be there to make some kind of sense, but otherwise they're kind of in it for just the gameplay, and they're not that interested in story. But more and more, I hear players talking about how that's what motivates them. They want to find out what happens next with the characters and the story. In the same way, you'd be motivated to watch the next episode of a TV show, or the sequel of a movie. And we kind of connect with the story. And I think it's now we're becoming more proficient storytellers. We're kind of making that connection, and as storytellers to kind of story listeners. And because of the unique way that players are involved in the story, that it's centralized around it, and they're not passively absorbing the story. They are the story. They're part of it, and they're shaping it. That's very powerful. And so, I think we're kind of better forging that connection as storytellers to our players who are becoming part of the story. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's natural that we always look for the story, and now I think we're just getting better at putting the story there and involving the players and telling the story. And we still have a long way to go, but we're just getting a little bit more savvy about it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the writing, and I want to separate story from writing because they're very different things in video games. I mean, in a game like Overlord, it's a very simple story, right? But the writing in it is so funny that I never thought I'd enjoy a game where you club baby seals for fun, right? I mean, that was what I found so magical about that game. It was a game that, like the Tropico games do in a different way, allowed you to do horribly reprehensible things, but it contextualized it in a way that made it make sense and made it fun without, falling into this stereotype of, oh, games are murder trainers or games, encourage antisocial behavior. It really hit a sweet spot in that way. And I really think it was the humor. Like, I like the games because it lets me be Skeletor. And I really like being Skeletor from, Masters of the Universe. I like being that evil genius that isn't that evil. And I assume, because it was a small team, you had a lot of creative control on that one.
Hmm. Um, to a degree, I was working, as I mentioned, working very close with the level designers on both the first and second game. It's just me writing stuff, but they would put together briefs for me about their level, what they wanted to do gameplay wise, what was happening in mechanics, whether there'd be a boss fight, whether there'd be a new minion or a new bit of gameplay or mechanic introduced. And then I would write a script that fitted that, and also I would talk to them about the narrative that needed to happen, where there might need to be a cutscene or a little bit of narrative, or where there needed to be room. So they would make room for story, and I would make sure that their gameplay was supported. And that meant that when the script went to the creative director one level up, he knew that I had gone through it with the level designer who had to put it in the game, and they were cool with it. And so that meant it was, although I was the one doing the writing and the story work, it was a very sort of collaborative process, and I think that's one of the benefits of being on a smaller team. You don't get the huge sexy budget to have kind of mocap and all that, but you do get to kind of work closely with designers, and I had a blast doing the audio directing, and I made really good friends with Mark Silk, who voices Null. And even though Fellowship of Evil didn't turn out very well as a game, it was really fun writing in that world again, and being able to sort of co-direct Mark. So yeah, and you don't get then. There's so few games where you get to be funny. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm rarely allowed to be funny outside of Overlord games. So yeah, I have to kind of sneak it in, and yeah, and then there's still a kind of fascination with kind of dark, gritty worlds, which I get on one level, but the Overlord games are a testament to how much fun humor can be in more than just script, but in a kind of world. Because I like to think, even though the script was fun, the humor was in the animations as well, and the world and the setup and everything. So it wasn't just, here is a game and here's a funny script on top of it. We're going to sort of build humor into the world, and that. But you rarely see games with that level of humor in, or even approaching that level of humor, which I think is a shame.
Yeah, I mean, part of it, what I've been told is part of it is the cost of localization, that when something is language driven,
Yeah.
that it makes it difficult to shift those idioms from market to market. But in a game, a big game, I mean, I thought you did such a bang up job on Heavenly Sword. Like, that game was so ahead of its time. I don't think it got a fair deal. And was that frustrating for you, crossing over from journalism to design, to just see, and I'm reading into some controversial territory here right now, but I think the press made an absolute hash of that game. I think it was really unfair to it and didn't appreciate it for what it was, and the achievement that, I mean, if that game was made today, it would get praised as, hey, it passes the Bechdel test. It's two women talking about something other than a man. But Nariko and Kai are such distinct characters as well.
Mm.
They suit their roles, they suit the game, and it's a wonderful friendship. I
Mm.
mean, so how was the process of that? And I mean, there's always talk about bringing that back. That's one of the things that I think fans and even a lot of pros would like to see that franchise come back. So tell me a bit about your experiences working on that game.
So Heavenly Sword was my first big AAA game. So I managed to get work on it because I think I'd met Tamim, and it sort of shows you how important networking can be in this industry. I'd met Tamim at a screenwriting workshop. I won't say which one, because Tamim and I bonded over the fact that we didn't like the screenwriting tutor. like Tamim and I had sat next to each other, and I'd read about Heavenly Sword and the difficulties they'd had getting it published, and so I could talk to Tam a little bit about it, and then I went to a talk, and just a little local IGDA talk Tam was doing about getting Heavenly Sword into production, and at that point I'd done beyond a little bit of work on Beyond Divinity. I'd done a little bit of work on a SpongeBob game and a Pac-Man game and Stronghold Legends. So I hadn't done that much. But I asked Tam about where they were with writers, and he said, oh, that they'd they'd done one round of looking for writers. They hadn't really found anyone, so they were going to do a second round. And I'd had a couple of JDs and Diet Coke, so I was feeling a little bit bolshy. So I said, oh, would you consider testing me out as a writer? And like he said, oh yeah, sure, and took my details. And I thought, oh god, that's the last I'm going to hear from him again. But 3 or 4 months later, I got a producer from Sony got in touch with me and asked me to do a test. So I sort of wrote the test during my Christmas holidays, and I wrote a scene that's actually my favourite scene in Heavenly Sword that's not in the game. And I used to use it as like a sample scene that I would send out when people asked for work, and it was a one between Noriko and Shen, actually, and it took a lot of influence from the Wushu movies I was watching at the time, and also my own experience with my dad, and it became my favourite scene. And I had a very long interview with the ninjas, I think bordering on 4 hours. Like, they kept inviting other people into it, so that like the number of people interviewing me sort of got progressively more and more. And then they sort of shuffled out into the corridor, whispered amongst themselves, came back in and offered me the job, which I didn't actually think happened in real life. And I remember going to the ladies' loos there and going, but I don't remember that much about the interview, apart from the fact that I talked quite a bit about Conan, the first Conan movie, which I don't. Are you familiar with the first Conan movie?
Yeah.
So about the character of Valeria in the first Conan movie. So Valeria is kind of Conan's girlfriend, more or less, but she's very much on a level with him, and they meet and do some kind of robbing and sweaty barbarian sex, and but she's in love with him, but he wants to go after Thulsa Doom, who killed his parents and decimated his village, and she's terrified that she's going to lose what she's got. And I'm kind of paraphrasing her speech, but she says, in the cold nights I used to walk by the tents of others and see figures holding each other in the firelight, but I always passed by. And like, for me, that struck a chord about what it means to be a warrior, that you give up normality and you give up real human contact because you can't risk it, or it's just not the life where you can make it work. And now she's found a way of making it work. She's sort of terrified of letting that go, which is kind of why she eventually, spoilers, gives up her life for him, more or less, or is prepared to give up her life, and sort of basically fights off the kind of demons and ghosts to hold on to him. But unfortunately, tragedy strikes, etc. But she is a great character, and I ended up talking about Valeria a lot in that interview, and that's what I remember. And probably Ripley from Alien, since knowledge of Conan and Ripley has definitely been helpful in the games industry.
I can see that, since they're two major influences.
Yeah, and certainly I grew up at an age where there were great female role models in fantasy and in science fiction. And I think that had a big influence on me. So I got the job. I remember Tam and I spent a couple of days locked in a room in Sony with Andy Serkis, sort of brainstorming things. So basically, I think there was a first draft script that Tam had written, and then we kind of completely rewrote it, and we worked with Andy sort of just brainstorming themes and things like that, and that was great. So there was a lot. I used to go up to Cambridge and work with the ninjas up there. you know, it was great sort of working with people like Andy and like Anna Torv, because this was sort of pre Fringe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was the first game to capture facial and body mode capture at the same time. It may have even been the first entertainment product to capture both at the same time. And it sort of predates sort of Uncharted doing it. And yeah, Andy and Tamim went over to New Zealand for like 6 weeks with the actors, at least once, if not twice, doing all the mode capture performances. So yeah, it was just it was a lot of fun. It wasn't, you know, it was pretty hard. You know, there were hard times. Absolutely, first really big cinematic game for the ninjas, the first big game.
So you went two very kind of profound ways in that answer that I want to sort of address separately.
Yeah.
One is you end up writing a lot of characters that are daughters and fathers or daughters and father figures. I do not think this is an accident based on your biography, but I'm not sure that people understand what a challenge that would be. How do you make sure that you are actually writing the story of the character and that character's father, who is also their own character, instead of pulling so much of your own experiences into it, like finding the right experiences so it's authentic instead of telling your story instead of the character's story?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been aware, and I guess a little bit more with Rise than with Heavenly Sword, of you know, making one's way in the world when, you know, you have a parent figure that's, you know, already done that to a certain extent, and you know, and forging one's own path. Yeah, that's something that definitely folded into Rise, even more with Nariko, and certainly I'd say her relationship with Kai was something I worked on very heavily, and that was, for me, was the central relationship in it. So it was, because that is that's what Nariko is ultimately fighting for. That becomes a motivation. So it sort of isn't to start with. She kind of almost goes a bit off the rails to start with. Like, because she knows she's going to die, she kind of lives more completely and honestly than she did when she was, you know, just trying to get by as a warrior and she had a curse. Like, once she's kind of committed this sort of blood pact to the sword, and sort of knew that, you know, in all probability she was going to die, you know, like, you know, she you know, goes, like, as I say, goes a little bit off the rails, but she sort of it's Kai that sort of brings her back.
Mm-hmm.
And she sort of realizes that ensuring a future for Kai and a world for Kai is her biggest motivation. So it's not a kind of say, you know, it's not saving Kai. It's trying to save as much of the world that is kind of good for her to have that future. So actually with her, that was the sort of central relationship. And it's interesting how I end up writing about female relationships, and even though they're sort of sisterly, Noriko and Kai, they're not actually sisters, but Kai was adopted, so they're sort of adopted sister, and Faith and Kate in Mirror's Edge. And I don't have a sister, and I'm an only child, but I always end up writing about sisters quite a bit. I don't know why it is. I never even wanted a sister. I wanted a brother. So I don't know. You just kind of poke around in characters' heads and find out what is the truth of them. And it was, you know, I like, you know, I sure drew upon sort of aspects of my dad for Shen and Noriko, and actually that scene is the scene that wasn't in the game, and to be honest, it wasn't a scene that was written for anything in the game. It was just a sort of campfire scene, and it was all about him. It was kind of based on something my dad used to do, and my dad used to take me out of bed in the middle of the night to look at the glowworms in the hedge. Like, when the glowworms would come out, like, he would like, sod this sleeping business, my daughter needs to see the glowworms. And he would take me out of bed to see the glowworms, and it was sort of I used that little story as a sort of a shared memory between them. And so I think that, because I think it says a lot, but yeah, certainly for me, Heavenly Sword, it was that relationship between Kai and Noriko, and that was something I focused a lot on. I talked a lot to particularly Lydia, who played Kai, about their relationship, and yeah, that was for me was that the central one, because it is Noriko's main motivation.
Mm-hmm.
But there was and I think it was reported, there was a Heavenly Sword 2 in development by Sony Cambridge that sort of got canned. Weird film that came out that seemed to be based on some of the animation from the game, but it didn't include, like, the ninjas weren't involved, I wasn't involved, Andy wasn't involved, like no one from the original kind of team. I think they may have carried over a couple of characters, but yeah, it was all very weird because it was such a long, length of time has passed. There hadn't been a sequel. It seemed weird. It seemed a weird choice that no one really understood. But
yeah. Now, the other question I had for you, based on what you said, was this idea of writing female characters. That dreaded term, and I find there's two main schools of thought in writing, and I'm generalizing horribly, obviously, but there's writing female characters is different, and you need to understand the differences, and then writing a character is a character no matter who or what that character is. So and I don't mean to box you in here, but this is just a starting point, but which theory do you subscribe to, and how do you sort of feel about this fetishizing of the female character in video games right now?
well, I mean, I guess I'm more of it's kind of character first. However, I don't forget they're female.
Mm-hmm.
Like, but it is, I don't make that a central thing, and that's probably based on my own feelings about being female in the industry, and also, for a long time, I've been in the industry since '98 as a journalist first, and without a doubt, every female journalist, every female developer, and a lot of female gamers, they've been asked to contribute or write for a piece about women in games, and it was always the same thing. It's like, look, women in playing games now, and it's been going on for 2 decades. And I never used to contribute to things like that because I also didn't want to be labelled as anything as it's always a female in games. Or Terry Pratchett's daughter. I didn't want to be labelled, so I didn't used to contribute really to those articles. And it was kind of only later with Tomb Raider and my previous work with female protagonists that I ever sort of wanted to talk about it a bit, because I'd had a long stretch in the industry. I'd done a lot of work. I obviously it wasn't just about being a female, it was about the work as well. And when I felt confident that the work was there, I had stuff to say, that's when I would talk about it. But yeah, and it always struck me that the people were focusing on me being female a lot more than I focused on being female. Like, for me, being a writer is more important in some ways because that's my choice. That's how I choose to make a living. That's who I am. Like, being female's there, but that I have no say in that. That's just a sort of more or less an accident of birth. That happened, and I enjoy being female a lot. I don't think about it as much as it sort of appeared the industry would think about it. And so with someone like Lara, I'm obviously aware she's female, and there are certain aspects of her where her kind of femininity comes out more in her relationship with Sam, for example. Like, it's much more of a female relationship. That they're just, I wouldn't have written it the same way if it was a male friend, or if they were two male friends. There was something, I drew on my relationships with female friends, and yeah, I think so. I didn't forget she was female, but I didn't sort of put that as that being the most interesting thing about her, and I guess that is what I want to ensure kind of going forward, that we're not just making female characters female for the sake of it because it seems kind of new and edgy, that they're actually, they're female, but all these other things that are just as interesting and probably should be, pushed ahead, and I hope that's where we're going to go, because I think we've got, we've always had some great female characters in the industry. They've just not been that diverse. I think we've had some the quality there, just not the quantity. So I think that, and certainly Lara has. I suspect developers putting more female characters in the game because the games have sold well. They've had a lot of coverage. I think people are feeling a little bit more easier. I mean, we've all seen stories about, I remember developers having such a hard time getting publishing deals because of having a female character, leading the game. And I think after Tomb Raider, everyone felt a little bit more secure about it. So I think that's one of the reasons we've been seeing all female characters. But as long as no one's putting female, they're just female, and they're hoping that's going to carry them. They still have to be characters. They still have to, you have to find their truth and what's interesting about them and what motivates them. But consider that they're female, and that's just part of them. So I've always, I guess it's halfway between the two. It's the character first, but I'm not forgetting the gender. It's just part and parcel of who they are.
Yeah, I mean, with a character like Lara, yes, she's female, but she was also raised in wealth. She was sort of given a family business, for lack of a better term, and a father who casts a very large shadow and a very dark shadow because of that disgrace for being right. I mean, being ahead of his time. With that backstory and the character being aged down, how did you tackle the challenge? Because it's a big challenge to take a character and essentially reboot them that is so well known and so defined. I mean, Crystal Dynamics did a great job before they took Lara sort of back to the beginning in creating a definitive Lara Croft story. Now you have to create a whole new kind of definitive Lara Croft story. So how did you approach that?
So Crystal had already done a fair bit of groundwork. I came on board, so they had an idea of how they wanted to work with Lara's character, and that already they just sort of naturally gelled. So they've been getting a lot of feedback actually from players saying they'd like to see a younger Lara, that they were interested in this period in her life sort of before she really became the Tomb Raider, and so they knew that there was interest there. So it was just sort of playing about with kind of who she was and how that kind of manifested. And I don't, people talk about old classic Lara or new Lara and things like that, but actually I still think that new Lara has a lot of the traits that old Lara did. They're just they're bubbling to the surface. So I don't think it was a case of taking it away. It was just a case of sort of rewinding a little bit, because she's growing, she's kind of meeting challenges and conflicts, she's finding ways through them. They're not always comfortable ways through them, but she's growing and developing. She's not developed. She's going through that tumultuous period that we all go through for many years, and so that was really interesting, fertile ground to work on, I think. And we played about with ideas. I wanted she has been raised in wealth to a point, and then basically more or less rejected that wealth and just wanted to put herself through university and distance herself from that wealth. And she talks about working at the Nine Bells, and she's always been fairly self-supportive once she stopped kind of being a child, really, more or less after her father died. Well, a little bit further. So once she was out of, I guess, secondary school. But she's always, certainly in her university years, she's always wanted to sort of be self-supporting and have more or less a normal life. So going to university, living with a flatmate, having jobs, that kind of thing. And so that was something I wanted to kind of explore, rather than she's been wealthy all along, she's got all the guns and the gadgets and the witty one-liners to deal with everything. She had more of I guess a normal life, like what a lot of young girls who live in London will have. she isn't normal, but
Hmm.
she's sort of striving for that kind of normality, which I think you kind of do, because you're still seeking to define yourself and who you are and boundaries and things like that. So we explore that a lot in the comics as well. There's a lot more flashbacks about kind of her young life when she was at Croft Manor, and she was sort of raised in a certain amount of wealth. It was something we didn't want to talk about and kind of fixate on in quite the way we'd done before. But obviously, it came back in Rise, so we brought the mana back. So we're sort of folding in a little bit more classic Lara stuff, and that was always the intention. I think people thought that the first one was such a radical departure, but actually we were considering the wider aspect of the story, but we're just choosing a particularly bad week for Lara to kind of experience. And there was very much a sense of the kind of wider world, and that was great, because when I was in the comics, I could sort of fold everything in that I couldn't about Lara and the world, and all sorts of stuff that I kind of thought about, but you only have a certain amount of space to do it in games.
Yeah, I mean, the other challenge you have in writing the Tomb Raider games is she spends the bulk of her adventure talking to herself. There's yeah,
Yeah.
it's a very solitary. I mean, this has been the design challenge for Tomb Raider games all along. Is it's a very solitary
Yeah.
experience, and I noticed in the Tomb Raider reboot, there was a very large cast of characters. Rise sort of did away with that and went
Yeah.
back to more the standard formula. And so there was Jonah, which was a lovely relationship, those two. And then, there were other characters, but there was a lot more solitary Lara time. And how do you are you constantly fighting the voiceover cliche there? Like, how do you approach that?
Well, with that, there was definitely, we wanted to kind of return to those quieter periods when she's on her own. I mean, I have, she does kind of talk a lot, and I myself do talk to myself from time to time. Maybe it's an only child thing, um, but there's also the kind of talking she does, where she's kind of almost advising the player about what she needs to do. But it
Mm-hmm.
is sort of, we built it into a character as well, and a lot of that kind of dialogue was handled by John in the first game. I did kind of bits of it before John came on board, and then Cameron did a lot of that in the second game. But there's this kind of level dialogue chatter, and then there are things like the journals, where you can have more of the kind of narration moments when she's sort of talking about her feelings and the kind of deeper stuff. But it's done at a quieter moment, so players actually have to sit down and they can kind of activate the journal, and it's obviously not interfering with the pace of the game. And that's something that's always very difficult to deal with. You're dealing with a third-person action game that's very pacey. To get these quieter moments that still make sense is very difficult. So those campfire stuff, that became very important for allowing the player to see a little deeper into Lara's state of mind. And I would kind of do those, and I think Lara's father's personal diaries to Lara as well, that she finds. So it's kind of creating those kind of quieter, deeper moments, which are, as I say, hard to come by once the action starts going. It's difficult to ramp it down to any extent and get these sort of quieter moments. So the campfire diaries have been great for that, but it is really challenging.
Yeah, I mean, what I like to see back in Rise of the Tomb Raider was those moments where you get a little dialogue sting where Lara first approaches a puzzle. I thought
Yeah,
those were really well handled, the way there was still character when it was a little hint, like,
yeah.
I have to pull this first. But the way it was done, those were some of my favorite writing moments in the
Hmm.
game because they were in character. It did give you that sense that she is enjoying the challenge.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And that was something that we wanted to kind of build on for the first game, in that she isn't an archaeology geek, and she does get excited about these things, and she does have that kind of passion and amazement and wonder about the world, which I think was really important to capture. And we did kind of, she's kind of a little bit more serious and not as confident as her previous incarnations, because she's young, she's exploring, but we wanted that sense of wonder, I think. and the just the excitement of exploring the world and discovering secrets, that was still sort of strong within her.
Now, to pivot into a game like Bioshock Infinite, where I
Mm-hmm.
imagine you were given the story there, like you didn't get a lot of say. When you get something like that that has a very complicated story, how do you now, because that is a really unique challenge. It's
Yeah.
not the same as I'm gonna make a story where I have complete control. You have all these variables, some of which, I mean, I know I've gotten stuff, some of it I don't even understand at first. It's so complicated with time travel and, rips
Yeah, sure,
in
sure.
time space and things like that. How do you approach something like that, where you don't have a lot of control, but you have to execute a very clear vision that somebody else came up with?
Well, my role on Bioshock Infinite was quite minor in that I worked on the barks, on the Vox Pop and Founder barks, and yeah, that's great because the Bioshock games have some of the best barks in games ever. So that they're a fun area to work on. And so actually a lot of my job was defining what the barks would be with Ken, just how that we would bring character through, and we were trying kind of a few different ways. And at one point, like the AI had enormous amount of character within my other cat is basically kicking the door in to go into the
Oh,
study.
they've heard cats do that on my end. You're right at home here.
uh, and so like at one point all the AI had quite well developed characters that then sort of changed and adapted when the tears started
Mhm.
happening. And that was kind of really fun, but it was very writerly indulgent, and we were just sort of playing about with ideas, and we realized that we were going to have to pare it back a lot because you might kill this character in 5 seconds and you might not like remember what they were talking about before. So it was fun. It was fun for the actors to try out, but then we had to sort of find a reduced way of communicating the same thing. So I was kind of playing about with characters having one life 1 minute, and suddenly that when the tears would happen, they'd be getting the memories of their previous life in another dimension, and that was sort of driving them mad. So there was one that I particularly liked, that it was a hard-nosed kind of political writer in kind of one dimension that found out that he was a romance novelist called
Mhm.
Winifred Minty in another dimension, and like this sort of this confusion and shame he had because he'd suddenly been kind of infested by kind of Winifred in her romance novel, and suddenly was supposed to be a hard-nosed political writer, and that was kind of a lot of fun. But in the end, we kind of pared it back to a reduced sort of version of that. But I'm a big fan of the Bioshock game, so it's really good even to kind of work on them in a minor capacity. And there's a lot of work like that. So teams were getting bigger. It's not so common to just have one writer now. There's usually a couple. You usually get narrative designers, so you will get a writer that's just come on to do barks or level dialogue or journals or something like that. And because that as the games get bigger, you need bigger writing teams. So I was just sort of I can't lay credit to much in that game, but it was fun to play around in that world.
See, I think that's a super important part because enemy chatter is a super important thing to me in a game. When it's, I think a lot of people don't notice it when it fits, but when
Yeah,
it's bad, it really hits you across the face that that line is wrong or that it doesn't make sense or that it's too repetitive is a big thing. That it's just those typical I'm gonna kill you
yeah.
things, instead of it actually being, because that can embed a player in the world in a really meaningful way. And so it may seem minor when you're writing it, but it's a major part of the experience. Because I mean, this is one of those things that I wanted to ask you about, since you've done things outside of games, but you've also done a lot of video game work. What is considered plot in a film or a TV show is dismissed as gameplay in a game, but you still have to craft it
Mm.
on the design end, because your writing is what makes the gameplay relevant and contextualized to the player. So how do you approach a scenario where, yes, you have to write it, you have to present it, you have to sort of put the wrapping on it without entirely knowing what shape the box is, because you don't know what the player is going to do? So how do you approach that challenge of not having control of where a line's going to go or what the exact context of it is going to be?
Um, you spend a lot of time speaking to the designers and reacting to playthroughs and play testing, and just sort of coming to understand how the player is going to play. You can also have a certain amount of fun play, knowing that the player's going to try and break the world, and kind of having some sort of fun with that as they kind of trying to kind of bounce up against the boundaries of the world. In something like Overlord, you can have a lot more fun with that. I think narrative designers again have become very good at having one foot in each camp and being able to kind of keep an eye on the design and communicate that to the writers, if indeed the writer is not the narrative designer as well. So it's just, I think by now I just have a real, I've been a gamer since I was 6, so I have a really good sense of the player's role in everything and how games are put together. I've got some, just a little bit of design credits, but not much. I've worked as a narrative designer, I've worked as a main writer and as a support writer. So for me, it's sort of second nature, I think, but it's asking a lot of questions, working with the designers, getting good briefs together, getting things story tested, using Scratch VO, using sort of temporary actors or actors in the studio to start, recording lines, getting in the game, seeing what's working and what's not. I mean, it's difficult if you've got people that aren't really actors and are not sort of performing the lines to see if they're working. But sometimes it'll be good for triggering. Don't know if just things are happening at the right time, and just trying to get as much information as you can, because you're right, you don't have control of the same things you would in the movie. I mean, you can kind of get timing a little bit, but and sort of context. And a lot of the Overlord humour was very sort of either observational humour about what was literally in the world at the time, or is anecdotal humour that could just be sort of dropped in. So I think you have to just become very familiar with the gameplay and just try and find those spaces to kind of make the narrative work, I think.
Now, how do you prepare for the iterative process of, the rewrites are coming, and there's always, on every project, there's 1, 2, if you're unlucky, 5 or 6 scenes that you have to redo over and over and over again. And there's no getting around it. It's part of the process, but nobody really likes it. Yeah. So how do you avoid becoming too frustrated with that element of doing this for a living?
I think you just get used to it. It's never not a level of frustrating. It depends. Like we did it. You have to, you become really robust for that kind of thing. We opened up the script and the story in Rise early to feedback. That was one of the things we did differently between Tomb Raider and Rise. We opened up the script early, and that meant we had we were writing in a headwind of feedback. So we had feedback from our own team and our publishers. We had internal testers, we had external testers, and so it was always kind of having to react to everything. But it helped us identify problems, identify what was making sense, what players were getting and not getting much earlier, which we did with the first game, but probably later. And that meant we had to do things like we changed the ending of the first game because from playtesting feedback, and that had been written and mostly mocapped, I think, and it was the players were sort of saying they thought it was too much of a down ending. And partly that's because originally when it wasn't so much of a cavalcade of death in the first iterations of the script, and then basically I had to kill off more and more characters, so kind of a down ending felt really down because of the path to that ending had changed, just because the gameplay had changed. And I literally had to be rewriting drafts and going back and killing off a character and writing them all out of scenes.
Wow.
Killing off a character and writing them out of scenes. So that we didn't have the same problem with Rise. So we had fewer characters, and that was very deliberate. And we had too many characters in the first game. We fully admit that we didn't have enough space to really flesh them out in the way we would have liked. And believe me, we thought about it. We knew all about these characters, and again, that's where the comics were useful, because I could kind of put all the stuff that I couldn't put in the game in the comics. So we had fewer characters. This one, we wanted Lara to have a bit more alone time. We wanted the characters that were there to really count and to really say something. And so that that meant we didn't actually. There was no situation where I had to go and kill off an existing character, I think. So I think the process was a lot more streamlined. So it's you get used to rewriting, and you're always trying to make things kind of better or more understandable, and it's just part of the process. The saying goes, writing is rewriting. You have to be okay with rewriting. You have to understand that it's going to make your work better, and once you become okay with that, when you're writing something for the 47th time. Actually, no, I don't think it was me that wrote that. There was definitely one of the scenes that we were changing a lot of the motivations for Lara up and down, changing the relationship between, I think, Anna and Lara, and playing with different things. And I did a lot of iterations. John did some, Phil did some. I think the end result was an amalgamation of various things, with John sort of pulling it all together. And that was probably about 47 times who wrote that scene, John tells me. I think that was the only one that got rewrote, but it was simply because we were playing about with motivations and how Lara expressed them a lot. But that wasn't just done by me. That was done by the team at various points. You get used to it. You have to, and you have to rewrite in every other medium as well. And you just have to accept that it will make it better. And it can feel frustrating, but ultimately, I think it sharpens you as a writer. You have to think round things. You have to your brain usually generates the kind of the easiest or most obvious kind of solution when you're writing things. So then you have to delve deeper and find more, things that are not so much on the surface. You have to find some way to, if not enjoy rewriting, then at least see that it has value, and it's always going to have value. I've had every writer has to kind of rewrite. This is why you have drafts, and with games it's such an iterative process. It should be an iterative process. You don't want a situation where you just get one go at writing the script and you hope you've hit everything, because that will never work. You have to iterate because the gameplay is iterative, and so the script has to be. And so I think game scripts have to be a lot more flexible to changes than, say, movie scripts do, because you're not writing the movie whilst the movie is being made, but you are writing the game while the game is being made. And so there's a lot of back and forth because of that.
They also tend to hire new people in a rewrite for a movie script, but in games, I mean, the nice thing about games is, you get to go back and you get to fix it. That's the nice thing. But how do you ever hit the point where it's like, oh man, I'm re-implementing a change I pulled out and put back in, and yeah.
You're always kind of fishing around in the bin of ideas, because it's like sometimes things something got tossed because of that, and now you find that if you take it out again and tweak it in this way, it actually works. Or you've done something one way, and somewhere down the line someone's gone, oh, let's do it this way, and you've gone up that road knowing fully well that you were on maybe the right track back then, but you have to do it the wrong way so that maybe the person or the feedback can go, actually I think that way was better. And that always happens. It's just the kind of process of rewriting that it is kind of all helpful. It can be a bit frustrating juggling all the feedback, and it's very difficult to get it's hard to feedback on story, because the loop between the kind of getting feedback that's really going to be useful it's useful to an extent anyway, but the loop between writing the story and it being in the game in the way that the player would fully experience it is really long. So there's kind of writing it, there's getting it recorded, getting it mocapped, getting the full animation, getting the full voice, and then you've got the scene that the way the player will experience it in the full game. With a movie, you just do it through a camera, but this is now, and you know, you have rushes and you can just look at the scene when it's done. Now you, like in games, you can't do that with the story, so you have to wait a long time before you get full feedback on scenes, and that can be difficult. And we definitely had situations on both uh you know, both games with Tomb Raider where we've written a scene, and you know, some people have been going, oh, I'm not sure about this scene, and you've had to go, trust us. And then it's been, you know, it's been voice, it's been animation, and they go, oh, it's really good now. And it's like, yeah, because we could see what it was going to be like further down the line, and that's something that, you know, all writers, you know, work with a very visual sense, and they can, you know, you can interpret from script to what it will look like on screen to a certain extent. I think it's harder for others, and because the narrative literacy of the industry is low compared to other entertainment mediums, that, you know, we're not so used to reading scripts and being able to visualize what the scene is going to look like when, you know, you've got the full actors in there, and you know, all the animation and mocap is working. We're getting a bit more used to that, but you know, working in other entertainment mediums, everyone has a understanding of story to a certain level. Everyone you're going to be dealing with, they might have different tastes, they might be terrible about giving feedback, but they have an understanding, and that isn't there to the same extent in games. There are more and more people that are getting an understanding of story and an appreciation of story, but it's, you know, nowhere near as much. And really, that's what we need to focus on and get better at. You know, everyone should be involved in the storytelling. Everything in a game helps tell the story. The mechanics, the animation, the art, the music, they all fold into the story. Until we, you know, I've always talked about, we all have to become better storytellers to tell stories. It's not just about the writers, it's about everything.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that there's still holes in the process in terms of communicating intent. I mean, just the little bit of voice work I've done, you know, you get those scripts and they're the spreadsheet form and it's all based on that. But there's so many things. I hear the finished product, it's like, oh man, if I just had that bit of context, I would have done that line completely differently. And you're like, oh, you want to pull it back, you know, but secrecy is at such a premium that it's almost like these teams are not letting enough information out internally because they're so worried about it leaking externally. Have you come up against this in writing at all?
I mean, I do try and encourage someone from the narrative team to be in the directing studio to talk to the, you know, the voice actors and explain to them about the characters, because the writer is going to know them better than everyone else, and you know, they can communicate this. So it's really great for someone from the narrative team to be present. And we were very lucky with, certainly with Rise, obviously we had Camilla back, we had Earl back for Jonah, so they had a real good sense of their characters. And we also opened it up to the actors earlier. So we had a table read with our actors much earlier on than we'd done in the previous game. And we got their feedback, and we could get a sense of, you know, what was working and what wasn't. And that was really useful. I mean, I still think the industry is getting its head around working with professional actors in the same way it's getting its head around working with professional writers as well. You know, and we are getting, in both camps, writers like myself that are becoming known for game writing, actors that are becoming, you know, known for their game work. You know, Nolan North and Jennifer Hale, for example. We're getting kind of our own, you know, voice acting stars, which is great. I still think, you know, actors could be brought in earlier to help workshop characters and things, but it is quite a long process of casting, so that you have to end up writing scenes. You will write fake, like I would write fake Tomb Raider scenes, like all the names were changed and they would be Tomb Raider-esque, but all the names would be changed to, like, so someone would be trying out for Jonah, for example, where they wouldn't be called Jonah, they'd be called something else. And you would kind of either write fake scenes in the style of that game, or just a kind of scene that you wanted to play around with kind of some aspect of that character. But I think even with Tomb Raider, we might have got some leaking from our voice acting sessions or our casting sessions. I think some of the casting stuff got out. So I think it is genuinely difficult, but I don't know, you've kind of got to weigh up the risk against the value that you get from having actors involved earlier. I think, they kind of want to be, and they want to understand the character, and they want to bring their best performance in the same way that writers do. So you've got to find ways of kind of communicating and keeping them in the loop. And I think we are getting better, but there's still quite a way to go. And I hate handing actors Excel spreadsheets, and I always will try and put them into a nice screenplay format, even if eventually on the developer side of things they'll go into an Excel or whatever program they're using, because it's so unfriendly to give an actor an Excel spreadsheet. But I think they get used to it in games, but it doesn't feel right.
No, it feels cold.
Yeah,
it's like you're reading numbers instead of
yeah.
Now how do, because this is something I struggle with, just you want to make it good, you want to turn in your best work, but you recognize it's not up to you. At the end of the day, they may use your stuff, they may not, and you may love a scene, but they don't. And it might have nothing to do with the quality of the scene. It's just the whole module of the game got yanked out. So how do you stay invested enough to put in your best work, but still sort of guarded or resilient enough to sort of accept that they might use it, they might not use it, they might go with something else, and there's nothing you can do about it?
It's just practice. I think it's just actually, I don't know if it's good. I don't know if you're truly able to deal with those experiences until you've had that experience. You just kind of, I've been doing it a long time, so I've become quite robust. And actually, I think working in games has made me more robust for anything else, because I'm so used to kind of working with so much feedback that it's, I appreciate feedback. I know how valuable it can be, and it's made me very kind of robust. But I don't think I could have got toughened without going through those experiences. So kind of accepting that those are part of the process and learning, and they will toughen you and they will make you a better writer because you're kind of going through those things. And a project can be tough for a lot of reasons. And I think I've been very lucky with the teams I've worked with. I don't know if there is a quick and easy way to be able to kind of deal with feedback, apart from knowing that it's coming, knowing that dealing with it will make you a better writer, or kind of, it will demonstrate your versatility, that you're able to kind of work to direction. I guess. But also at the same time, knowing what battles to fight, knowing, when you have to step up and go, no, this is not right for this character, and these are the reasons why. And so it is sort of picking those battles. You can't do that every time.
No.
And there's just not the time to do it. That people get frustrated with you, so you have to really choose when you're going to kind of go into fight for those things. So it's understanding and being okay with the fact that feedback is going to come, and you're going to deal with it. And especially if you've got a team around you as well, that helps. Like there's of support, and a lot of the times John would be responsible for collecting all the feedback together and streamlining it into kind of workable things. So there will be feedback that's coming in that's maybe not useful, but there may be feedback that's coming in that is. So he would often streamline that into kind of useful things. Okay, based on this feedback, we're going to do these things. And we talk about it, and we talk about whether there were different ways of doing things, and we play around with ideas. So a lot of it is support, is time and space to work on that feedback, and sometimes and knowing what is valuable feedback, because feedback that is very specific in terms of, you have to change you know, this aspect in this way is normally not that useful,
Hmm.
but it gives you the shape of the problem, and you go, okay, that is the problem, but actually I can think of a way of solving that. If people are very about what the answer, it's usually not right. But if they're telling you what the problem is, you can come up with the answer. So yeah, that's the problem. Knowing the problem rather than being given, answers is much more useful. And how, that time, that time and space to play around with things and understand that story is iterative, and that the writer's not going to do the 100% best job first time, because they're getting to know the world and the writers and the story, and that's okay. So writers have to be okay with feedback and iterating, and everyone else has to be fine with the fact that writers then are getting feedback and they're iterating in the same way the designers are, in the same way the artists are. That it's all kind of part of a process. You don't just nail it first time, rarely anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I mean, you don't want to polish it up too much on the first crack, because it's wasted time. You know it's going to
Yeah,
change. So, yeah, you have to get something in that's good work,
yeah,
but it's not like, it's going to go into a clean manuscript edit and go to print
yeah,
after that. Even like the fourth run at a game, it's going to change radically. And so it's not worth the effort and the time to polish it up too much, because yeah, the actor may not even deliver the line as written,
mm, mm.
you know.
There's just so much that can change in the game, and that has nothing to do with the quality of your writing. But it could be, okay, this scene has to change because now it has been moved, and so the gameplay going into it is this, and the gameplay you're running into is this, or um, it's this level has been chopped out, and so this scene occurs in this environment instead, and that therefore that changes the tone, or the pacing has changed, so now the scene needs to be more tense rather than sort of more downbeat and kind of peaceful, and so that there's all that changes. So you've got that to deal with, which is one of the unique things about games, because you're not dealing with that when you're writing a movie script. You have your time to write your movie script, and obviously once a director is involved and it's getting made, they may bring you on as writer, they may not, they may
Mm-hmm.
have someone else. It's sort of, you never quite know what's going to happen. That's sort of a sort of slightly different world. Your world is a script developer where you are more or less in charge, not in the same way, right? An author would be, but you'll have your feedback, your producers, your script editors, and you'll have to bring that on board. But you're kind of in the middle of everything, and you're shaping everything, and you're taking in the feedback, and you don't have to worry about someone kind of filming it, or at the same time, or building scenes, or casting actors. That's going to happen far down the line, but now you're doing it at the same time, and that is kind of a crazy situation to write in, but that's hey, games.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got networking.
Hmm.
We've got being resilient in the face of feedback. What's the last bit of advice you'd give someone who wants to be a video game writer?
Just write and read. It's the same advice you give kind of any writer, is understand, you know, writing, practice writing, read screenplays, play a lot of games, understand how the narrative is being put together, but understand the craft of writing. Take creative writing courses or read books. You know, your reading is very important to writers, and being able to kind of nourish your brain with narrative, whether it's in books or news stories, or whatever. It's all good. You've got to keep nourishing that brain, to just talking to people, listening to the radio, whatever. You've got to keep that up. So polishing your writing, and understanding how you become a better writer. That's all really essential, and that's essential for everyone. And it does work with, it's important for game writers as well to actually uh, nourish that writing side of things. And with the games, just play a lot of games. As I say, look at the way the narrative is put together. Try indie games, try AAA games. Where everyone's doing different things. There's lots of stuff to explore. there are the narrative conference at GDC is really, really good for interesting and inspirational stories about people trying and failing and failing better and then kind of getting it right, and that everyone is very open there about this is stuff that we did that didn't work and this is how we fixed it. And there's a lot, it's very reassuring. Like our talk at GDC, the Rise talk, we were open, like this didn't work so well in the first game, so we tried doing this instead and that seemed to work better. And people like hearing those stories, and you realize that everyone is trying to work out how to do it. And as my friend Jim Swallow says, who works on the Deus Ex, there are no maps for this territory. We're just all trying to work out how to do it right, and there's no sort of one path yet, and I don't think there'll ever be one path, because it varies so much. So working on your skills as a writer, brackets reading a lot, absorbing life, talking to people, all the stuff a writer should be doing, looking at how narrative is working in games, networking, but also just talking to people, being interested in people. Writers have to be interested in people. So we talk about networking, but it's a bit of a cold word. Just get out there, make friends, talk to people. You never know what's gonna happen. My work on Bioshock Infinite came from a friendship I made 10 years ago with a guy I was a friend of a friend, and I think we ended up going to a gun range in LA and eating steak together, and we'd been sort of casual friends ever since. And 10 years later that actually turned out into writing on Bioshock Infinite. So there's lots of great people in the industry. Get out there and kind of talk to them. There's a narrative summit at GDC. Most of the conferences have kind of narrative tracks, so it's kind of, there's much more stuff out there to help games writers. There's lots of books out there now. There's the IGDA's Writer Special Interest Group that is full of full-time game writers like myself, narrative designers, students looking to get into narrative, other disciplines interested, and so that's kind of a lively group, and it's usually the same people that are at the narrative summits. So there's a lot that can be done. I have a special FAQ I put together for anyone that emails me asking about it. So I just collated all the most frequently asked questions, and because otherwise I'd never stop answering emails. And so if anyone wants that, just drop me a line via my website and I can send it. So it's an exciting era to be in, and it's so amazing how much it has changed in the last sort of decade and a half, from kind of where it used to be, and how much the industry seems to care about story and characters now. Still not as much as writers do, but we're kind of getting there, and it's wonderful to have seen that change.
Awesome. Rhianna Pratchett, everybody. Now that we've finally got the internet to be stable for a good chunk of time. Rhianna, thank you so much for taking the time. This is really, really informative. And we're going to turn off the camera now and talk more about Moomin.
Okay.
If you know what Moomin are, good for you. If you don't know what Moomin are, learn about Moomin.
Yeah.
Rhianna, thanks so much.
Thank you.